All right. And okay. Hello. Welcome. Today's the first episode of Some Musical Thoughts. Just a series where I have conversations with random people, I guess is the best way of saying it. But I just wanted to have conversations with my friends and other colleagues just to kind of have fun and learn and do stuff, talk about stuff and stuff. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for joining me today. My first guest I'm really excited for is Kaelyn Putnam. She's awesome. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited I was going to say be here. I mean, we are both respectively sitting in rooms
Yeah,
in the same place. So, of course,
true.
be here is figurative. But I'm really excited to be on the stream, and I'm really
Oh,
excited to
crap.
what we talk about.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to say most of that again. I realized I had the audio muted for your side. Um, my bad. So,
Oh, good.
how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be on the stream, and I'm really excited to see what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those who may not know who you are?
Hi. So, I'm Kaelyn Putnam. I have a degree in music education. My primary instrument is the flute. Although I've actually been playing guitar longer than I've been playing the flute. On my free time, I enjoy hiking. I am an avid collector of vinyl. Do you ever have moments where like you mess up grammar in real time
Mm.
and you're like, that was despicable because I said a avid, sad
Oh, yeah.
face, an avid collector of vinyl. My favorite band of all time is Fleetwood Mac. I think they're the greatest group of people to ever assemble and make music, but that's just me being a nerd. Um, and I'm again excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured we'd start kind of just talking about philosophies a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Good to hear. Yeah, so we talk about philosophies because as both people of music education,
Mm.
there's a maybe not a huge focus, but there's a pretty big focus on philosophies. And I know from our previous talks, I was really intrigued with what you had to say about your philosophy. So could you tell us about your philosophy with teaching and music and stuff?
Absolutely. So I got my music education degree with the intention of being a band director. So I'm in the band world. Um, it's really interesting, and it's not this way for everyone, but for me, flute was very much my vehicle to be in band, whereas
Mm-hmm.
there are some people who band is their vehicle to play their instrument. I'm kind of the opposite, as it were. Um, so again, keep in mind as you hear me talk tonight, I'm very band oriented. So that being said, my philosophy of music education is that the most successful music educators will generate students who continue making music for the rest of their lives. So we're not necessarily talking about getting out 1,000 yo-yo ma's out of your band program, which again, that wouldn't be happening anyways because he plays cello, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, my whole point is not like every single last musician that goes through your program is going to be first chair of wherever they end up.
Yeah.
The whole point of music education to me is to create um, civilians, sure, in whatever country they live in, adults, absolutely, adults who are passionate about music, have a kind of a base level understanding of it, and want to continue playing it in all the way through adulthood, all the way into like retirement bands. I know we're lucky enough to um, live in an area where there are a lot of wind bands, and one of them is like a retirement band. And I think there was one point where the guy who played tuba was like 93 years old.
Wow.
So, like, in my world, in my mind, whoever taught that man a very long time ago
Mm-hmm.
had to have been one of the more successful band programs or band directors in the area because he played it his entire life.
Hmm.
He never quit. He always found the joy in it. He always returned to it. It was always a part of his life, and I think there's value in that.
Interesting. And can I ask, how would you facilitate kind of encouraging students to kind of keep on going for lifelong?
Sure. What I find kind of funny, and this is an important point as well in my musical journey, is that I come from an area where band and high school marching band in general are both very competitive
Mm.
activities.
Yeah.
So in middle school, it was a really big deal that we all got all superiors all the time on all of our concerts. So there was not a lot of, sure, there was leeway. I don't know if that's entirely the right word, but there was not a lot of leeway to be a beginner, if you understand what I mean. Like
Yeah.
where I come from, it's very much you immediately have to be blank. You immediately have to be the superstar on your instrument. You immediately have to be whatever. And again, fill in the blank. And in high school, the band that I was a part of was on the BOA circuit.
Hmm.
It was always decently intense. For example, the show my senior year, we ended up having, I think, and man, it's been 10 years now,
Mm. Wow.
10 years ago now,
Yeah.
but I think we went through, I'm undershooting this number, and it's still going to sound ridiculous. I think we went through 10 rewrites of the final movement of our show,
Wow.
a handful of which happened within the last 2 or 3 weeks before we went to Grand Nationals.
Wow.
So imagine, I mean, I was 17 at the time because I was a senior, but imagine being that 13 or 14-year-old freshman who's going and memorizing music quickly. And at that point, I think we wanted a specific look for that closer too. So we went through 2 or 3 different drill designers for the closer.
Wow. That's
And
wild.
yeah, and at the end, we landed on the guy who was writing for Crown at the time.
Hmm.
So imagine going through 10 different iterations of the same music and then marching Crown drill as a high schooler. So I
Wow.
come very much from the mindset of like, it has to be great all the time. You don't have room for error. You
Yep.
don't have, whatever. You're expected to perform 100% of the time. And even if the instrument isn't to your face, then in a way you're still performing because you're representing the band. So like you have
True.
to understand that's how I was raised. But my philosophy of creating musicians who play for a lifetime, quite frankly, there are some elements of that. Clearly, everyone wants to be good at what they do.
Yeah.
Everyone wants a teacher who's going to hold them accountable. But quite frankly, my philosophy in achieving my goal is to not be as make or break about it.
Mm.
I think there's a point where some of that intensity can be toxic.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of down to the individual, honestly. Because I remember in that environment, some of us kids handled it really well, and some of us kids didn't.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, but I can tell you that a lot of the students from my high school quit immediately after high school,
Wow.
band-wise. So what was weird, and you and I obviously we went to KSU.
Hmm.
Harrison was very close. And that was my high school. What was
Mm.
crazy
Yeah.
was that a lot of Harrison kids went to KSU, and I would always pass them on the sidewalk,
Yeah.
but they never played, they never marched, they never did anything. So like it was kind of surreal because like all of the music students at KSU were essentially surrounded by people that I
Yeah.
had marched with, and they were never even aware that they had ever been musicians because of the sort of situations of going through 10 different rewrites and 3 different drill designers in a
Mm.
month. And it was too much. And I
Yeah.
think, honestly, in an environment like that, I think that could be too much for maybe some adults,
I would
whereas
think so.
it was certainly too much for some of the students. Um, and I want to be clear here, like, this is not me bashing that.
Yeah.
That is a very cool side of our activity, and um, it's always so neat to see what people can make, and it teaches so much
Oh yeah.
about leadership and practice and good performance etiquette to the students. So there's still
Mm.
value, there's still validity. But again, my own philosophy is to not be so make or break about things, instill a love of music, um, and honestly to work a little bit more on musical fluency. I think
Yeah.
my dream classroom environment would actually have me giving out projects where students were writing their own music,
Mm.
like actually
Yeah.
doing things kind of outside of the box to create ownership, autonomy,
Yeah.
and just an environment where students can really be themselves, obviously still within our band program because they
Right.
still have jobs to do, they still have instruments and music to play. But I think allowing a student to find themselves and express themselves truly um, lends itself well to people who want to continue doing it for a lifetime.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I know for a while part of my, because I think my philosophy more centers towards uh, building, helping students to, or just thinking of music, making it more natural, kind of similar to yours. Um,
Yeah.
but I had a kind of vision of like projects where, like you said, like doing like a semester, like we're gonna try to compose a piece or arrange something,
Right.
and then maybe another semester recording something,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of alternating different like more creative projects just to get them ideas of this is what you can do. Um,
Yeah.
and because I think you're right, there's a lot of these band programs and a lot of music programs are kind of more focused pre-college, more focused towards we're in band, so we do band things.
Right.
Um, and often, sometimes there isn't enough leeway to allow the students to truly find what they want to do.
Right. Well, and I think something that kind of contributes to this as well is the sort of repertoire choices you're making.
Yeah,
Um, I find it interesting because you have those pieces that are academically very sound,
yeah,
and then you have those pieces that are fun to play, and then you have those pieces that are classic, and sometimes the classics are just fun to play, and sometimes the classics are academically sound.
yeah.
And you just have like these different types of pieces too. And I think a good way of making lifelong musicians, um, and I'll say this and then I'll explain it a little bit, but I just think that educators need to be able to read the room. What I
Mm,
mean by that is, let's say that we have a grade 3 ensemble where students do not intend to become music majors ever in their lives,
yeah.
but they're just there to express themselves and make friends. It seems like a lot of modern music educators kind of look down on that concept. And,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
heard it called scale jail. I've heard it called a multitude of things.
Hmm.
Um, what I find interesting, though, is why wouldn't we harness the fact that these students are still enthusiastic to be there, or else they wouldn't have signed up?
True.
And again, this band is not going to give you yo-yo ma's.
Yeah.
And I think music educators need to be okay with that
Yeah.
because these students might not be shredding. But again, if we're going off of the philosophy that a successful music program puts out students who are lifelong musicians,
Mm.
then why wouldn't these kids who are doing it for social reasons, why wouldn't they be the ones who would continue?
Mm.
So again, reading the room, if
True.
you have a grade 3 ensemble, you should still be reading the classics
Yeah.
because the classics are a classic for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
But you should also be a little bit more realistic about the sort of pieces that you're picking for them because they're in it for a different reason. The students who want to be Yo-Yo Ma, who are really incredible, and their fingers are on fire every time they play because they play so fast, and they sight read new solo pieces every week, like those sorts of
Oh, yeah.
kids. They get the enjoyment out of playing the hard stuff.
Yeah.
So in giving them the hard stuff, you are creating a musician for life. So
Hmm.
again, I mean, I don't know if it's coming across. And I also feel again that in our field, some directors kind of look down on those, concert bands or those beginning bands.
Yeah.
But I think it's all about harnessing the energy, harnessing the enthusiasm, how it is, and meeting the students where they're at.
Hmm. Yeah. That's a good point. I know you go to like all these LGP type things, and oftentimes it's like you hear like one or two or three or four or five same pieces throughout the same day.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I had a revelation, a slight bit of a revelation this past semester. I went to
Yeah.
see two bands at the Gwinnett County Marching Exhibition because
Mm-hmm.
I was didn't have time for the rest, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
one of them was more, more core, or like kind of drum corey, kind of
Yeah.
doing like more serious music, right?
Sure.
And then the other one that I saw was more traditional. What is it?
Like a show band.
Show band, yeah. And I know with the show band, I noticed like I know me speaking as a tuba player, sometimes tuba parts aren't exactly the most interesting things in the world.
Yeah.
I know I just got one piece recently that was like literally just like this, just holding out a note with rest in between. So that's pretty
Don't.
fun. Yeah. But it was like I was listening to the show band, and they're like, the tubers are just going ham, playing all these like
Mhm.
crazy bass line kind of things that you would hear like more in like jazz or any kind of like rock or
Right.
modern group that has a bass player in their group.
Right.
It's very interesting and sounds like it would be fun. And it made me realize I might be kind of behoovant to kind of include some of that style into more some of these drum corps style bands. Just
Honestly,
like maybe like one little piece where it's kind of more showy. I don't know.
I think that's a really good point. And like specifically using the tuba example, I don't know how much you know about Motown music,
Oh yeah.
um, but it's like all the soul music that came out of Detroit in like the 60s and 70s, and Motown is short literally for Motor Town, because I think they
Yeah.
started out as like the Motor Town Review or something, but it was a record
Oh
label.
okay. Hmm.
And the way that it worked
Yeah.
was that this record label had a stable of artists. So they had like Smokey Robinson and the
Yep.
Miracles, they had Diana Ross and the Supremes, they had the Jackson Five. But behind closed doors, they had the same team of writers writing for each of the bands. And they actually had a group of session workers that recorded on all of the recordings.
Hmm.
So again, when Berry Gordy founded Motortown, he based it off of Ford. And I promise you that this is relevant, I promise.
Okay.
But he based Motown off of Ford and the idea of the assembly line, that the song would come through.
Oh.
There would be writers, someone would arrange the music, people would play it, then there would be singers who would, go and perform it.
Yeah.
So that being said, when you listen to Motown, it doesn't matter which group you're listening to. There's a bass player at Motown. His name was James Jamerson. And he is one of the most incredible bass players to ever walk the face of the planet.
Wow.
So he's all over the place. There are a bunch of octave leaps. It's
Mhm.
very melodic. He uses a lot of passing tones to get from one, chord
Oh yeah.
tone to another. So he's just very melodic. I think
Hmm.
he started out as like an upright jazz player, and then started playing the electric stuff, and
Right.
that style kind of followed him. So just speaking from experience here, I enjoy dabbling in arrangement and
Yeah.
arranging. I think, Kyle, this was after you had already graduated, but there was a point where we had an arranging day with the Marching Owls at KSU,
Oh cool.
and students who had arranged could put their work in front of the students,
Oh
and have them read it. And it was kind of an informal day. Dr. T wasn't there, our director.
yeah.
Wasn't there. It was just ran by our drum major, and we did it. And I arranged Ain't No Mountain High Enough by Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell.
Oh cool.
Again, a Motown product.
Mhm.
The bass line is a James Jamerson bass line. When I tell you that it wrecked the low brass, it wrecked the low brass.
Damn.
And like, our guys were good players. Our guys and girls were good players. So it's not a knock on them. It's just James Jamerson was a beast. And I mean, those octave
Wow.
jumps are weird enough on the fingers anyways, but then when you start to do stuff with your mouth and
Oh
it's
yeah.
more chops wise, I mean, it was hard. And I remember afterwards, not all, but there were a couple of low brass folks who walked up to me and were like, if this is supposed to be a stance tune, because that's what it was. It was
Oh
supposed
yeah.
to be a stance tune. It wasn't supposed to be a halftime thing. They were like, if this is supposed to be a stance tune, No, because we don't have enough time to work on it. This is the amount of
Dang.
work that we would have to put into this bass line for a 30-second snippet isn't worth
Yeah.
it. And
Wow.
it's just because James Jamerson was ridiculous. So like,
Huh.
I almost think I know like jazz musicians transcribe a lot and then play what they
Oh
transcribe
yeah.
and like do everything by ear. I would almost imagine that there would be value as a low brass person to transcribe James Jamerson stuff and then try to play it.
Oh, true. Very true. I know I haven't really been focusing on James Jamerson, but I've just kind of periodically just been notating down random bass lines from songs I've been listening to. And it's been interesting to learn. I know it's like trying to play any sort of string bass thing on a tuba is not hard. It's not impossible, but it's definitely a challenge. And it's
Right,
worthwhile challenge. It's because I mean, the biggest thing is obviously string bass. They don't have to take a breath.
right.
So they just keep on going, and it's just like, yeah, we're going. And meanwhile, I'm here, da 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 da. Yeah.
I remember there was a time in high school when I was a junior, we played a band transcription of the second movement from Shostakovich's 11th Symphony.
Mm.
And it is a very aggressive piece.
Yeah.
It is really abrasive. It's one of my more favorite classical pieces.
Mm.
But, you know, you
Yeah.
think there are flutes in orchestra. We'll just get it, you know, at a modified flute part. Everything's going to be fine. We were playing the violin parts the whole time.
Wow.
It was the same exact thing because they don't have to breathe.
Yeah.
It was murder. That was knockdown drag out for like, I think that piece is long too. I think it was like 10 or 11 minutes.
Makes
And
sense.
I just
Yeah.
remember every single last one of us being super winded afterwards. It
Wow.
was tough.
Yeah.
So I feel that.
Yeah. String transcriptions can be really tough. Definitely worthwhile, but yeah, tough. I know, especially reading Bach cello suites and stuff. Those are
Mm.
fun, but as one player, tricky.
Right.
But yeah. Anyways, why don't we talk a little bit about New Year's resolutions, since we're kind of, what is it, 2 weeks, 1 or 2 weeks into the new year now?
I
I guess,
guess it's two, isn't it? Nearly
yeah,
two.
yeah, I think we're getting close to 2 weeks into the new year at least.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we talk about New Year's resolutions a little bit? I'll admit that this year, I personally am trying to do more with resolutions. In past, I've been more of a person who's been like, meh, it's just New Year's, it's fine,
Yeah.
and just kind of passed it by. But
Same.
I know I was talking to you earlier, like a couple days ago, about when we were planning stuff for this, and you were saying you had some really good thoughts about resolutions. So why don't you tell us
Yeah.
about how you've been doing resolutions recently?
I would love to. So I used to be the same way where, you know, I tend to be kind of a philosophical person anyways.
Mm.
So like part of me that's like time is a construct and we should just live our lives and it might be a new year, but it's just a new day. Like
Yeah.
we, you know, like we just spun around again
Yeah.
on Earth, period. But, you know, I do kind of think that just within human psychology, we benefit from the idea of thinking that chapters begin and end. And I
Mm.
think years are a very easy way to kind of stay organized in that way.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of last year, I was thinking, well, maybe I could do some sort of resolution. And I know we talked about it. It was never a resolution in kind of the traditional sense. It was more so a resolution of I try to make my goals as attainable as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I actually continued to modify my goals throughout the entire year because, you know, in January, who really knows what you want to do in June?
Yeah.
So I gave myself a lot of leeway. I was completely okay if I didn't achieve some of them. I was okay if I added more. But the way that I kind of, and I didn't even call it a resolution. All I called it was self-love 2022.
Oh.
And the whole way that I was treating it was that I was going to prioritize some of my interests and I was going to prioritize some of the things that I wanted to do for myself just to make sure that they would happen. And I know we talked about it on the phone, but I'm one of those people who kind of benefits from structure.
Yeah.
Pardon me. And I kind of feel like a lot of people benefit from structure. I don't think that's me. It might just be a human thing.
I think so
And
too.
I know that once I graduated from college and missed that structure, I just felt
Mm-hmm.
like some of the stuff was kind of coming by me,
Yeah.
and I was missing things. And clearly, it wasn't anything big. Everything
Yeah.
was fine. But it was like the little stuff, and I just felt like I was missing stuff as it was flying by me. So again, I just wanted to be a little bit more intentional. I wanted to
Mm.
be a little bit more deliberate. And so I created different categories for myself. One of them was new things that I want to do in 2022. Another category was something I want to do again in 2022.
Hmm.
There was another one that was self-care items that I want to try. So
Hmm.
like I like meditation. Meditation works really well for me. And what's funny is it's meditation for me is one of those things where like it's good for you, but you don't always do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like every single last human can relate to that.
Yeah.
Is that we all have those things where we know that it's good for us, but then when it gets, it's too late, you're too tired from school or work or whatever, and you're like, screw it, I'm not going to do it today. And then you fall off the wagon, and then you
Yeah.
never do it again. And then 6 months
Yeah.
later, you remember, and you're like, oh, that was so good for me. Why did I stop?
Mm-hmm.
So meditation, I kind of have that sort of relationship with meditation. One of my goals for last year, and I kind of fell short on it, but like just as an example of self-care, I always find that when I meditate not once but twice in a day, so like
Hmm.
maybe once in the morning and once at night, that I'm just a lot more balanced. And believe it or not, I wear like one of those fitness trackers. When I
Okay.
meditate twice a day, my resting heart rate is actually lower. Like there are actual
Wow.
physical ramifications, if you will, of me meditating twice a day. And I would assume that having a lower resting heart rate is healthier for me in the long run. So there were
Yeah.
actual physical reasons to meditate twice a day. And like I said, I fell off because I'm also human.
Right.
But one of my goals was to meditate twice a day as often as I could.
Hmm.
And again, I did it for long enough to see that there were benefits to it. So that was one of those things. Another one of my goals was to read 25 books. I am definitely a music person. If I'm looking
Yeah.
for any type of entertainment, I'm probably going to my record collection or
Hmm.
I'm going to practice. I'm not going to read. I also
Yeah.
write. So if I'm in that sort of mood, I might just write up my own story rather than read someone else's.
Oh,
But,
interesting.
hmm but even like in those situations, I found that nights that I read before I went to sleep, I went to sleep quicker. So again,
Hmm.
it's one of those things of like, well, maybe I should. I think it's good for me. And then, well, why didn't I?
Yeah.
So last year, I wanted to read 25 books. And the year before, keep in mind, the year before, I only read like two or three.
Wow.
So 25 was a massive jump for me.
Yeah.
Um, and I ended up at the end of the year reading 23.
Hmm.
So it was one of those situations where, and this is where it comes back to not beating yourself up over it, is that I wasn't too sad about not hitting 25 because 23 is better than 3.
Oh, yeah.
So it was one of those situations of I set a goal and I did it. Perhaps not exactly how I said I would, but I did improve because of it. So this year, my goal is to read 30. We'll see if I hit
Cool.
maybe somewhere between 25 and 30, and I'll be happy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I had like a list of the books I was reading. And then I also had a couple of other lists as well. You can tell I'm a list person.
Yeah.
And this is all on this massive, document on my phone.
Dang.
Excuse me. I had, as I said, two or three other lists. One of them was a definition list for words that I had learned last year.
Oh, cool.
Another one was a list of new songs I had heard or songs that I rediscovered
Hmm.
last year. And then just the books I was reading. So
Yeah.
I started doing that, I think, in either February or January or February of last year. And it started just because I wanted to be more organized, more deliberate.
Hmm.
And believe it or not, I feel like I'm really achievement motivated. Like
Oh,
if
yeah.
you can show me that I've done something, I am far more likely to do it again. So
Mm-hmm.
actually keeping track, and like I had like the little emoji check mark that I would put every time I would do one of them. And there was something about that that was really motivating. So like, believe it or not, I actually did a
Cool.
majority of the stuff on my list last year. And I think it's because I figured out a system that worked. So when this year started, in fact, I started on New Year's Eve of last year. It was such a long time ago, but
I know.
um, on New Year's Eve, I started writing Self Love 2023.
Hmm.
And I rolled over some of the goals that I didn't make last year into this new year, and then I added some new stuff. So what I'm
Cool.
finding is that the goals build on each other. So that's kind of a rundown,
Wow.
kind of like a general rundown.
That's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Um, I know I might steal some of that myself and try some of
Do
that
it.
myself. I
Do
know
it.
for me, routine is something that I struggle with constantly. Like I
Hmm.
know in undergrad and my master's degree, I tried at times to like actually like sit down and make some sort of a schedule and be like,
Hmm.
what can I do to fill in my free time? And it never really worked for me. Like it
Yeah.
would be like 1 week, but I think I might try some of this and see how it goes.
Sure.
Um, but I wanted to ask, what were some of your favorites from the books, songs you heard, uh, whatever? What was the other one? There was another one.
Words that I'd learned.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll give you those favorites, and then maybe too some of my favorites that I achieved. I
Mm,
think my
yeah.
favorite song of last year. Uh, it's tricky. It's a lot.
Yeah.
I know last year, and I don't know if you've ever done a lot of listening to this genre, but I really enjoy bossa nova.
Oh, cool.
It's all from Brazil, and it's in Portuguese.
Mm,
So it's just like this very like kind of, I don't know, as an American, it feels exotic to me. Like maybe to
yeah.
more internationally
Fair.
savvy people, maybe it's not very exotic to them. But in bossa nova is cool because it comes from kind of like this Afro-Brazilian place, beat-wise and rhythm-wise. So the rhythms are usually kind of complex, and
Mm,
there are a lot of like polyrhythm type things going
yeah.
on. And then the harmony is usually very jazz-based.
Oh, yeah.
So like the thing that drives me crazy about bossa nova is to the layman's ear, it sounds really dumb. And maybe
Hmm.
not dumb, but just simple. It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
because when you think about bossa nova, you think about elevator music. Everyone's
Oh,
heard
yeah.
bossa nova because
Yeah.
it's usually shtick. Like someone usually brings it up in a show,
Yeah.
and it's like whenever something awkward is happening, bossa nova is playing in the background. So I kind of think that Americans just kind of have this idea that bossa nova is like stupid or like awkward, or it's that sort of, it's elevator music.
Yeah.
But if you really go back to its source, and it's just really unassuming music that's theoretically actually very complex.
Hmm.
So I spent a good 3 or 4 months just listening to bossa nova
Wow.
by itself. I wasn't listening to anything else. And
Cool.
I just found it to be so interesting. And it was my first time really listening to music that was in a different language.
Yeah.
So it was a learning like in a lot of time. Obviously I've heard music in other languages before,
Oh,
but I had
yeah.
never spent so much time with it.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
it answered a lot of my questions of like, well, will I still relate with the music? Will it still
Oh,
speak
yeah.
to me? Will it still whatever? Because, I don't know what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I mean, what's funny is like I would still end up singing along, and I clearly probably was not getting all the words right,
Yeah.
and I don't know what in the world I was saying. But I still wanted to participate in it. I still wanted to take things from it. I still
Yeah.
it was still a musical experience.
Hmm.
So I say bossa nova in general, um, just because it's
Yeah.
cool. I feel like it's really gotten me out of my comfort zone harmonically and just listening wise. And
Hmm.
I think especially musicians, but
Interesting.
anyone, um, we all could really stand to have our palates challenged listening
Oh,
to
yeah.
music. The more
Absolutely.
challenging, I think, the better. So that's that.
Hmm.
My favorite word I learned. Um, I don't know if it's my favorite just as much as it's the one that has stuck with me.
Okay.
I didn't know that
Yeah.
Corollas are flowers. I drive a Toyota
Oh,
Corolla,
yeah.
but apparently a Corolla is a flower. And I just
Hmm.
never knew that before. So apparently it's like the Toyota flower, and I drive a little flower around. Um, so I
Nice.
thought that was kind of interesting. And I learned that in a book by John Muir. And John Muir was the guy who founded Yosemite National Park. I'm a really big national
Cool.
park and like wild places buff.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to read about him founding all of this stuff. And there was a point, it was actually written from his, like, he wrote it. And I think the book originally
Yeah.
came out in like the 1870s or 80s. So this was
Hmm.
old. It was very old. And it was funny because he talked about following the sequoia trees all the way south to as far as they grew. So he started in Yosemite and
Interesting.
followed the trees all the way down California.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of interesting to read about.
Hmm.
But as far as my favorite book, there was a moment in a book that blew my mind.
Okay.
One of the things that I really wanted to do last year was I wanted to learn more about ancient civilizations
Oh,
because I don't know, I guess I'm a nerd, question mark.
cool.
Um,
Yeah.
so I just found it really interesting. So I went to Barnes and Noble one day and I went to the ancient history section and I wanted to see like all of the things that they offered. And there was this one book by a guy named Leviticus, but he's known as Livy in modern times. So it was Livy. And I read
Okay.
1 through 5 of his history of Rome. So it was from the founding to the first time that Rome was sacked. Um, and I'm not going to lie to you, a lot of it was really boring. A lot of
Mm.
it was really dry. But what's interesting is I think Livy lived, um, I want to say that Livy was alive during like 800 AD. So like
Oh.
these are very, it was an old
Wow.
work and it had been translated from Latin. And the one thing
Hmm.
that really stuck with me, but you have to keep in mind that since he was writing about stuff that literally happened 1,000 years before him,
Oh, yeah.
and they didn't really have a historical record back then,
Yeah.
apparently he was making up a lot of this stuff.
Oh, of course.
So he
Interesting.
was, yeah, and what they were saying was that he basically intended it to be Roman propaganda, and that he
Oh.
was gonna write about stuff that had been passed down through, oral tradition, but he was
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
make the Romans always sound like they were really incredible. So
Hmm.
that's what it is. And the book ended
Interesting.
with Rome being sacked for the first time, I think, by the Gauls.
Okay.
And it was really interesting. It was a really nasty war, and finally the Gauls had arrived, or I think it was them. They had arrived at Rome, right at the gate of the city. And it was within enough time that the women and the children and the young men and everyone left. And at the end of it all, the only people who were left were the senators, because they were the elderly men who were in charge of Rome, and they had pretty much just decided, if she goes down, we're going to go down with her.
Yeah.
And so rather than launching some sort of counterattack, they actually just sat in their backyards and they actually wore their senatorial robes. So they got dressed up for it.
Oh.
And they all sat individually by themselves, supposedly, according to Livy. We don't know if he's lying.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, just the picture of it is really moving to me. And they all sat stone still, silent, in their backyards waiting for these people to come into Rome and steal everything. So
Wow.
the Gauls come in and they sack all the houses and everything, and then they waited for the rich people, the senators, they waited until the end to sack their stuff because they figured, that all of the best stuff would be in there and they wanted to save the best for last.
Fair.
So the Gauls sack all of these houses and they go into the backyards and they find these senators sitting there, stone still, waiting for their death. And according to Livy, in his, high tales that he's making up,
Yeah.
the Gauls were actually really moved because these men didn't fight and they sat there and they just accepted death. And they just took it. And it was to the point where, according to Livy, it was eerie to the Gauls because they wanted a fight, because it's harder, I would imagine, to kill someone who's just sitting there waiting for death rather than they're trying to kill you back.
Wow.
So, like, it was just like this really poignant, like, story of like these people who just kind of accepted it and were like, well, if Rome goes down, I'll go down with her. And it's funny because my first thought when I read that was, why hasn't a composer written a piece about this?
Hmm.
Can you imagine a really programmatic piece where it starts off quiet and it's all of these people hanging out in their backyards, and it's, crazy and loud and ruckus because these people are coming and taking Rome over,
Yeah.
and then it ends quiet again because all of these guys had quiet deaths. Like it's kind of deep, but like I was just like, why hasn't a single composer not written this before?
Yeah. That is very interesting. That
I
would
think
make
it'd be a
for,
three-piece.
yeah, that would certainly make for a really interesting, at least backstory for a piece.
Right.
Um, huh. Yeah, I had no clue. That was
It just really
interesting.
moved me.
Yeah.
Which again, I mean, Livy could have been lying.
Yeah.
He could have been talking out the side of his neck. I mean, we don't know because Livy
Yeah.
lived a long time ago.
Right.
But still, like just from like the point of a story, like how interesting.
That is an interesting picture to have in mind of these fancy senators just like sitting there just as everything's on fire, and they're just like, it's like that one meme of the dog that's in the middle of the fire, right?
This
Everything's
is
fine.
fine. Right,
Except I guess these guys aren't like so much panicking. They're just kind of like, whatever, it's on
right,
fire, it's fine.
right. Well, and I almost imagine them being like very stoic and
Yeah.
very like almost just kind of accepting their fate and just sitting there and almost like statues. Like imagine too how scary that would have been for the soldier who was coming into the house and seeing this man sitting completely still. You're not expecting anyone to be left.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's just sitting there completely still and silent watching you.
Wow.
That had to have been horrifying. So like yeah, it was a really moving picture to me. And it was funny because it happened at the end of the book because it was at
Yeah.
the end of the fifth volume. So I had went through pages and pages and pages about elections and all of these silly
Oh
things that
gosh.
were so boring
Yeah.
to get to that
Wow.
point, but that point was so worth it. It was
Huh.
so cool. So that
That's
was, I
really
guess,
interesting.
yeah. I don't know if that book is my favorite that I've read, but that was probably my favorite moment that I read about.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna comment on the bossa nova stuff. I did a small amount of research last spring,
Hmm.
because I was playing a piece that, and part of the program notes said that one part of it was inspired by, I forget what the genre was, but it's like a Brazilian style of music. And I remember
Hmm.
trying to look that up and listening to that, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And
Yeah.
also it was very hard to find particularly exactly what he was trying to reference. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Brazil seems like a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Like, what's interesting too is like a lot of bossa nova is love songs, but
Hmm.
bossa nova is also apparently like very much a protesting genre.
Hmm.
So I mean, what
Interesting.
they had some government upheaval this past week. I mean, Brazil has been
Oh
having
yeah.
a hard time for a while. So a lot of the bossa nova artists, like there was a lot of censorship. Um,
Oh
because it was
yeah.
kind of a back then this would have been like late 50s early 60s, their government would have been very like totalitarian.
Hmm.
So a lot of the bossa nova
Yeah.
was kind of a double-edged sword because it was kind of masquerading as a love song, but it was usually also protest against the government.
Oh
So like
yeah.
for example, there's this one song by a guy named, and I'm probably going to butcher his name because I'm an American, but his name is Chico Barkway, and
Okay.
there's this song called Construzao, and it's about construction. It's about a construction worker. And the
Hmm.
whole point of the song is that the construction worker is working in the middle of the road and he gets hit by a car and he dies.
Wow.
This took a very dreary turn,
Yeah.
but
That's.
it's interesting because he tells the story from three different perspectives, and it's
Hmm.
all indicative of the Brazilian government back then. So, like the first
Oh.
one covers it up, the second one is
Uh.
kind of honest, and then the last time it actually tells the truth of what really happened to him.
Yeah.
And I guess there was a point in the song where he talks about a glass of wine, but I guess the word for glass of wine in Portuguese is a synonym for like a chalice of blood. So that was, he actually like he wrote about the glass of wine so it would get past the censors, but he was really talking
Oh.
about how the Brazilian government was like just covered in Brazilian people's blood because they were harming them.
Wow.
So like again, all of these Americans who talk about bossa nova, and
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, well, that's elevator music," and it's like, okay, you
Not
can you
quite.
can choose to continue vibrating on that frequency, but I'm
Yeah.
here to tell you that it's a lot more than that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think at the core of most music, it's kind of a lot more than just some pretty notes.
Agreed.
But cool.
Just interesting.
Yeah, definitely for sure. Um, so why don't we move into our last little segment? Just talk more. What do you like to do when you just to relax and stuff?
Sure. So I know I've already said I write a little bit,
Mm,
and I'm really thrilled. I know we didn't talk about this on the phone, but I have to get this out.
sure.
So I started rewriting a story from when I was in high school.
Hmm.
I finished, quote unquote, my first book when I was 17. And it was about
Cool.
300 pages long, but it reads like it was written by a 17-year-old, so it's never going to
Oh,
see the light of day.
fair. Yeah.
And it was really funny because I just didn't know what was going to happen to those characters because if it's never going to come out, then, these characters are just going to kind of live in an oblivion for in eternity
Oh
and go
yeah.
nowhere and they're just going to collect dust. Well, what was really funny was at the end of November, there was like this spark and I got inspiration for the story again. And I'm actually rewriting it now as a
Oh
26-year-old year
cool.
old. And it's funny because it's coming out a lot better than it did the first time because I'm no longer 17 and in high
Right.
school. And it just feels really viable. Like I know that I put out a book 2 years ago, and I can already tell you that the way that this one is in its first draft, I think it's better than like the third or fourth draft, which is what I published with
Wow.
that first one. So like I'm really excited about it. I've been working on it now since like the last week of November, maybe even the beginning of December, and I've already got 90 pages down.
Wow.
So
That's awesome.
and that's and the muse right now is around. So um, I don't know. If I don't hit 30 books of reading this year, it's going to be because I'm, just
Right.
writing and the words are going to be like bleeding out of me.
Putting out like 30
But I mean,
books of your own.
hmm?
Putting out like 30 books of your own.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's the dream. So I've been doing that lately, but then I've also been listening to a lot of records. I've been
Yeah.
collecting records now for a little over 10 years. So that's usually what I do to like cool off.
Cool. Yeah. And also just a quick note for anyone. You can find um Kaylyn's first book. What's your name of the book?
It is called The Woman of Fall, Modest Beginnings, and it's under a pen name. It's under KD Putnam,
Yeah.
as in the letters, the initials. But what's funny is I'm actually thinking about changing that again.
Hmm.
So I
Okay.
might put out the book again with a different pen name.
Oh,
But
interesting.
for right now, The Woman of Fall, Modest Beginnings.
Cool. Yeah, and I put a link in the description
Thank you.
below, so you can go and find that and check it out if you're interested. It talks about uh marching band a little bit, right?
Yeah, it's nerdy band things.
Yeah.
It's a bando book.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Do you have any idea when this new one is going to come out?
Well, I actually already have a sequel to Modest Beginnings
Oh,
that
cool.
is about 70% of the way done. I still have to write some new material for it, and then it has to go through editing. So that's going to be the next release.
Oh, cool.
Um,
Yeah.
this book that I'm writing right now, which is funny because I really should be working on the sequel. But if the content is coming for this other completely different story, then I need to follow my muse where it is.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
so that I don't know. I mean, this story could come out next year. It could come out 2 years from now. It
Hmm.
just depends. It's about 90 pages long right now, and I kind of have a vision that each book in this series is probably going to be 500 to 600 pages long.
Wow.
So there's still a significant amount of work to be done on it.
Wow. Cool. Well, sounds interesting. I know
Thank you.
I never got around to reading your first book. But it's definitely on my something that one of the books that I want to read this year. 'Cause
Yeah, I'd appreciate it.
yeah, yeah. Cause I've
There's
got
no pressure, just whenever.
yeah, yeah. That's one of my personal New Year's resolutions is just read more books in general. because
Yep.
I've bought some books and I've been given some books that I just have been sitting on my bookshelf for the longest
Hmm.
time. And it's like I've maybe like glanced into it, some of them, but most of them just kind of sit there for a while. So that's definitely one of my goals is reading a lot more. But
I
yeah,
feel that.
yeah. But anyways, I don't know. Is there anything else you want to say or have to add? I've kind of run out of ideas and things.
No, I just think that records are really neat. Um, I guess I actually accomplished something on my New Year's resolution today.
Oh wow.
Um, I am a very big antique lover, which I know I've been telling you in like our texting that I am 26 going on 85 years old. So going
Right.
into antique stores and listening to old music and looking at old things makes me really happy.
Mm,
Um, and I
cool.
have been, this is also a very long story. But my favorite animal ever since I was a child,
Yeah.
um, are penguins. I
Mm,
love penguins. And this year, at the end of last year, I actually ordered myself a little like porcelain penguin
oh cool.
that was an antique, just because I had finished a writing project and I wanted to reward myself.
Oh yeah.
So I've learned so far this year that one of my like latest interests is learning about like old porcelain stuff. So I've been going around to like different antique stores looking at the porcelain, which, again, I feel like kind of cements my role as an old woman. And I went to a new antique store today. One of my goals was to go to a new antique store and look around and see what they had for porcelain and records and stuff. So I walked into a brand new antique store today. It was fun.
Cool. That sounds
So
fun.
that's nothing more than a for the good because I don't really think it's relevant to anything we've talked
Yeah.
about, but I know I'm
Fair.
excited.
Yeah. I mean that's awesome. I mean, half of this is about you today, so that's fair.
It's true.
Uh,
It's true.
which art? Because you purchased like from various like a lot of different artists, right? And records and stuff.
Yes, I have a record collection. This is kind of wild. At the end of it all, I have about 650 records.
Wow.
I've been collecting now for, like I said, a little bit over 10 years. My newest record came out last year. My oldest record was pressed in 1904.
Wow.
So I actually have a collection that spans the entire time that records were made, and continue to be made. Um, So I listen to really old stuff. I even have like I have three old cylinders. They're not wax, but they're like the old cylinders. I've
Oh,
got three
okay.
of those. I've got about 100 of the 78 RPMs, which were the first like flat discs.
Yeah.
That's what the 1904 is. And then, like I said, all the way up to 2022, I enjoy the color vinyl because I know that they do like different patterns and different colors on vinyl, which I
Oh,
think is
yeah.
cool. Um, but yeah, I have a lot of stuff in my collection. I'm
Cool.
pretty proud of it.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Um, well, I can't think of anything else. Unless you have anything last you want to plug or anything, you already plugged some of your upcoming works that are coming. Um, unless you have anything else to add, um,
I'm good.
I think that's a
I'm
pretty
good.
pretty good ending. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate talking to you like
Thank you.
always. Um,
Hmm.
it's been a great conversation, and
Yeah.
I hope you have a great night. And everyone who's watching, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it a lot, and we'll see y'all around. All right.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, of course. Bye. Okay. Here we go.